this month. He wanted 45 bred heifers. They cost $2,200. I said, okay, wire the down payment of $500. He did that. He sent his truck, they loaded, and got home and he wired the rest. The ironic part was he actually wired too much money. So when he wired $100 extra ahead, so $4,500 over what he needed to pay. So I quickly Facebooked him, told him he overpaid, and I sent him a check back. And so that is where the industry is slowly moving. As we are more comfortable on Facebook, that's not going to be uncommon. And I also do some seed stock management and marketing. I run the marketing component of SITS, and in working with Riverbend, Churchill, and several other organizations to market their cattle on Facebook as well.
I have a question for you.
Yes?
If your Facebook account was optimized or something and the money was sent to somebody else, who covers that?
Oh,
Who returns that?
we email them a buyer registration and they wire the money directly to the bank.
Oh, okay.
Yep. All just the communication was done on Facebook.
Oh.
And so we're ranchers as well. We're getting ready to calve about 500 bred heifers. The first one hit the ground yesterday. And so I am on both sides of the industry. I buy calves, but I also have a purebred Angus herd of my own. So I see both sides. So my job as a cattle buyer is how can I benefit you guys and get you guys the best bang for your buck while making the other end happy as well. It has to be a two-way street. So kind of what sets us apart is that we have 3 different options for marketing cattle. We sell a majority of the cattle through the country. So we come in, you have 600-pound steers, I pay $2 a pound for them. I'm going to mark them up and sell them to our feeders in the Midwest. We also sell some cattle on the Superior Livestock video auction and on the country page. And we think that these 3 options give producers the best opportunity. If you want a video, we can help you with that. If you want to sell them in the country, we can do that as well. If you want to put them on the country page and pick your price, we can do that as well. So Rose Cattle Company, the cattle sold directly to the feeder. This is our favorite option. As I'll kind of talk about market volatility when we get going, this option I think is going to decrease. Superior Livestock, a lot of people are worried about the commission on Superior. That's something that I hear a lot. It is 2% on feeder calves. Now the nice part about it is I sold a set of calves on Superior in September. They weighed 715 pounds. The high of the day was $2 a pound. The calves that I sold that day sold for $2.21 a pound. So the producer didn't really care about the 2%, but I also worked my butt off to get those cattle sold. I got about 7 new feeders signed up to buy on Superior, and one of our customers bought through Superior. And he had already put a bid in at $2 in the country, and the guy had turned it down. So he paid 21 cents more just to buy them on the video because he really wanted those calves. And then the country page, you can pick your price, which is the best part about the country page. You can say, I want to sell my steers for $250. People can bid up until $250. If they bid $250, they're sold. Okay, so factors that affect price. If you have one of these, we're going to kind of go through this. So I think on the 2nd or 3rd page it talks about a little space where you guys can write down. The big things when I'm talking to my feeders in the Midwest, one of the big things is genetics. They want to know where you buy your bulls. That is one of the first questions they get, besides weight and all that. When they're really interested in a new set of calves, they want to know where you buy your bulls. And that's very important to them because they follow those seed stock sales and they see what calves do well. Also nutrition. We see this a lot this time of year when cattle have been on feed a little bit because guys still own them. Make sure if you're going to wean and feed your calves that you work with a nutritionist because the feeders in the Midwest will not put a bid on them if they've had too much corn. And that is something that a lot of people don't realize. If they're fed too much corn, what it does in the feed yard is it stunts the growth. If they've had it from weaning too much corn. And the feeders will not bid on it. They'll hardly bid on calves that have been fed corn after weaning at all. And so that's something to keep in mind. If you're going to maintain ownership until about this time, make sure that you work with a nutritionist and you get a good ration because they will ask me detailed per pound how much your calves are eating. Some other factors, live versus killed, virus vaccines, that's a huge, huge thing. A lot of people don't think about it. I do not have a single feeder who will buy calves with killed vaccine. Not one. They all want modified life because that's the program at the feed yard. And so we have avenues to go with killed vaccines, but they're not my feeders. I have to work with my partner, Dennis Metzger, who was the general manager of Western, to get those calves sold. So if you have an option, I know live are a little bit more expensive, but it makes your cattle 10 times easier to market. Okay, 1 round of shots versus 2 rounds. If you have 2 rounds of shots done right, it adds money to your calves. If you have 1 round of shots, it's going to decrease. So you're going to be below the average. So if it's easy, do 2 rounds of shots. Now I know some guys, some are up in the mountains and that's difficult. That's fine. But if you have them close where you can give them a pre-weaning round of shots, do it. Shipping conditions. This one, a lot of it is out of our control, unfortunately, but cattle shrink a lot by the hour. And so a lot of times I know that it's hard to get your cattle gathered in the morning. A lot of you separate the heifers from the steers that morning. But your cattle are shrinking as you're doing that. So it's really, really important that you have a good crew, that you have good drivers, and that you get them there as efficiently as possible. Now, what a lot of times people try to do is they try to go and feed their cattle that morning because they're like, okay, well, my cattle are going to shrink, so I'm going to feed them that morning. Don't do that. The feeder won't buy them again if you go in and feed them the morning you're shipping. Feed them the night before, give them access to water. They do much better on the truck if they haven't eaten that morning, because what do they do when they get off in the Midwest? They're going to head right for that bunk, and if they've never seen a bunk before, it gives them an advantage. Cattle uniformity. This is a big one. A lot of times we have really spread out calving periods. That's tough for a feeder because he is hedging your cattle on the board to finish at a certain date, your whole load. So if you have some that are 100 pounds heavier, that's really tough for him because he has to take those out, put them with some cattle from another group in order to make his hedge correct on the board. This is a big thing too. Full loads or split loads of steers and heifers. I know every small producer probably has a split load of steers and heifers. These are worth about 10 to 15 cents less, a split load is, than a full load of just steers or heifers. The reason is because a lot of guys only buy steer calves, so that takes out half of my customers. Also, there's going to be a weight difference here. So when they get there, they're going to have to sort them and they're going to have to split them into 2 different pens. Now, what we encourage our customers to do is find a neighbor who also has a half load of steers. If they're very similar in type and kind and you guys agree on a similar vaccination program, it doesn't have to be the same, but if you're going to do live, you both need to do live. If you're going to implant, you both need to do implant. And put them together. We have that happen all the time. If the cattle work well together, it's a great match. But selling a split load of steers and heifers is really tough for us to market. And weighing up, the correct weigh up is also really important. Make sure, we'll talk about contracts in a little bit. Make sure in your contract that you're close to the weight. If you have to go out and check weight your calves, 2 weeks before we ship, and give me a call and say, hey, my contract reads 550. I just checked weighed my calves, they're 500. That's going to make your life 10 times easier and my life 10 times easier. But it's very important to get the weight correct or as close as possible on your contract. Another few factors, preconditioning shots, if you do it right, that provides extra money. Implants, I know that's a big question for a lot of people. We buy a lot of steer calves that are implanted at branding. The reason implants can affect price is because if you implant your heifers, it takes them immediately out of the replacement heifer category. And I know they keep coming out with studies that implants on replacement heifers are not terrible, but I don't have a customer who will buy them. So implants are just a decision that needs to be made, and they can add weight to your calves that can add pounds in the end. And then breed type. We get this a lot. It's nice to accurately describe your cattle. I don't really care if they're Charolais, Hereford, Angus, Red Angus. I don't really care what they are, but if they have some Gelbvieh in them, I need to know. If they have some Charolais in them, I need to know. And the reason I need to know is because I have one customer who only will buy limousine calves. They have to have half limousine. And he'll pay extra money, higher than the market. But a lot of people don't worry about those little genetics, and they just say, well, they're all black. Well, that does not mean anything to me. And so, if you have other breeds in there, tell me, so I can properly market them. And the big thing is to let us know all the details. Yes?
I hate to stop you, but just a thing I've been pondering. Grandpa used to spay his heifers. Back in the day, he'd keep the best ones, and then for replacements, he'd spay the other ones. And I believe he got a better price. Is that still a norm for nowadays time? Because I haven't heard much of people spaying their heifers.
I'll tell you where it comes into a benefit. I buy a lot of replacement heifer calves, and we don't always guarantee, but a lot of times we preg check them. And I cannot tell you how many heifer calves are bred. They'll be bred in September. They'll be bred in October. And it's because we've shortened the gestation period, we've increased maturity, and so they're reaching maturity faster when the bulls are still in there. So spaying it takes that problem out, because if a feeder calls me and says, I bought the calves from that guy, from you, these are them, and a heifer calved, he's never going to put a bid in on your heifers again.
That's good to know.
Because it's very difficult for his crew. He's not set up to calve. And it also takes one out, then they have a calf. His feeders are trying to, deal with the calf who's born to a teen mom, and they're trying to make it work. Now, it does come in benefit. The reason, though, is a lot of people are not selling replacement heifer calves. If we look at the study from Cattle Facts, we have had a lot of people just keeping. We're not trading a lot of replacement heifer calves. I think that's going to change. And I think we're going to do more trading. And so you can either spay your heifer calves or make sure you pull the bull out, making sure you're watching for signs and pulling the bull out earlier, which will also tie up the uniformity in your cows. And so those are kind of two options. But I do know that if your heifer calves at the sale barn or at the feedlot, I'm going to get a call. One of our kind of mission statements is to sell the right cattle to the right people at the right time with the right details. I have a feeder who will not buy one that's just straight black and fancy. No, he does not buy them. He wants the colored ones, he wants horns, he wants cutting bulls, he wants anything that's a little bit below the market. If I accurately describe the cattle to him, he bought a load for me, and they were really up and down in size. It was a new producer, and I just called and I said, these are black steers, but they're pretty up and down in size. They have some frozen ears, some frozen tails, no frozen feet, and there's some horns. He said, perfect, just my kind. But if I wouldn't have told him that, he never would have bid on it. And so it's very important to us that we sell your cattle to the right people, because there's a market out there for any calf, but it has to be to the right people. And one of my pet peeves is on the video. I'm not sure how many of you watched the video. But every other set of calves that comes in there is the fanciest set of calves that have ever walked on this earth. We all know that's not true. And there's buyers out there for every class of cattle. We just have to accurately describe the class of cattle so that the buyer comes back every year. And that's our goal. We have guys who buy the same steer calves they bought for 23 years. And they don't even care what they weigh. They don't care what the market is. They don't care anything. They know the producer, and they know they're going to be good. And so let's go over this contract. I know this is kind of a big thing. I have it in your book here. So I think a contract is the most important part. And so the number one thing is when someone comes and puts an offer in your calves, you guys need to check and make sure they're licensed and bonded. And you can check that by going to the USDA Department of Agriculture license and bond, and it will have every state and their name and their bond. For example, I'm bonded under Rose Cattle Company, which is my father, and under Superior Livestock. And we have a $100,000 bond, which means that for every dollar the bond is, we have to have $8 to $10 of non-bankruptcyable assets. And so that means if we write you a bad check for $100,000, you can collect your money. Now, if you go on and look at some of those bonds on some of the buyers, they're $5,000 or $10,000. I'm not saying that's bad, because could I get a bond at 23 years old? No, I own a car. And so I couldn't get a bond, but I'm lucky to be bonded under my father, who's worked his whole life trying to get a good bond. But if that person writes you a bad check, it only covers between whatever their bond is. So if their bond's only $10,000, you might only get $10,000 and they have your calves. So it's important to go look up. When they come, I can pass around my cards so you know what to look for. When they come to your house, make sure they're carrying their card. So I have 2 Montana ones and I have an Idaho one because I buy calves in Idaho too. So make sure that's the number one important thing when someone puts a bid in on your calves. Ask them, can I see your bond card? Because we're finding more and more people are trying to bid calves that are not licensed and bonded, and that just gets you guys into a situation that's tough. It's easy for them, it's illegal, but it's easy for them because if they trade them quick enough, they don't technically own them. So that's the number one thing, is to make sure you're checking. And if they say I'm licensed and bonded and they're not on the list, like you would never find me on the list because I'm under Superior and I'm under Rose Cattle Company, don't be afraid to call the Montana Department of Ag and say, hey, Caroline Rose just put a bid in on my calves, what's her bond? And they'll tell you. They'll say, well, she's bonded here and she's bonded here. So do not be afraid to call, because we saw some really bad wrecks this fall with people who backed out on loads, not us, but people who backed out on loads and got some tight situations. So that's the number one thing to do when someone puts a bid in on your calves that you don't know. It used to be a handshake deal, and I'm sure some of you guys in this room remember selling your calves. Someone would drive down the driveway and say, I'll pay $1 a pound. You'd be like, okay, here's my handshake. They'd come pick them up in October. Well, we're getting away from that, unfortunately. So the number one thing on the contract is make sure the buyer is bonded. Make sure that you agree upon and schedule your shipping date. Don't just let them say, I'll come get them in the fall, because they might never show up. Make sure that they give you a contract, especially the wrecks we saw last year happened with people who bought calves in May, delivery in October, and the buyer signed the contract instead of the feeder. We have instant communication. We can call someone all over the world. You can get the feeder to sign the contract if it's from May to October. And you can ask them proof. Now, in our situation, it's a little different because I'll have a contract with you guys that says, you're the seller, I'm the buyer. I turn it around and I sell them to the feeder. So even if the feeder backs out, I still own the cattle. And I come and pick them up. Now, that's not the case in most situations in Montana. The contract is between the seller and the feeder. But make sure that they provide proof that the contract is signed by the feeder and they sign the contract.
I have a question.
Yes?
What recourse do you have if somebody defaults after you've done all of those same things?
On the contract? Oh,
Right.
you can go after them.
Who can? Do you hire a lawyer to do that, or do you call the Department of Ag? Or?
Department of Ag will help you do that. The situation that happened this year is the feeder never signed the contracts on these contracts that I'm talking about. Just the order buyer signed, but it was such a big difference in time that there's no excuse. Now, sometimes, say you come up to me after this and you say, hey, I have 50 steers that have to go. I buy in Great Falls every week. You say, I'll run them down to Great Falls. Can you fit them in? And I say, yes. Well, I might not send you a contract. I will email you a contract. But I might not send one in the mail because we're what? A few days away. Now, that's the exception. But you should still see a contract and make sure that you see that. The other thing is make sure the contract is very specific. If you have 150 cows, make sure that you account for the calves you're going to sell. And the reason that this gets picky is we are in an extremely volatile market. I'm not sure how many of you are addicted to the futures like I am, but we saw the biggest drop in history this fall. Bigger than mad cow disease, bigger than 9/11, the biggest drop in history. It's like going to the Dodge dealership and buying a car that you ordered and you put leather seats in there and they came up and they did not have leather seats. Are you going to buy the truck? No. You're going to tell them to get you a new one. If your contract is wrong, what could the feeder do? He could send them back and say they're not according to the contract. And we're going to see more of that as the market volatility continues to go up. So make sure your contract is accurate. If your buyer misses something make sure you write a note and say, hey, they've actually had these shots. Don't just say, oh, it's okay, it's close enough, because it's not going to be close enough anymore. And another thing is collect your down payment. A lot of the video companies, I believe, do $15 a head, which is stupid when the calves are worth, what, $1,600? How much do they do?
100.
They do now? Okay, that's good. But that's still not very much. Because you have to think of it this way. If you put $100 down on a Dodge pickup, and you found one much cheaper that was exactly the same, are you going to go pick up that Dodge pickup? A lot of us would say yes because we're good to our word, but there's a lot of people who are not good to their word. And that's why it's important that you're working with a buyer who has a consistent clientele in the Midwest. And make sure that you get enough money down that it's worth coming and picking up those calves if we see the sharpest drop in history. Now there's also another way about that. We don't expect our feeders to back out. My dad's been buying cattle for over 25 years. We've had one feeder back out. His name is Dennis. I sold him a whole bunch of calves this year. He called his banker, said, hey, I bought some calves from John Rose, wire him the money. And his banker said, nope. He said, okay, well, why not? And he said, because they were too high. And this was 15 years ago. His banker obviously didn't see what was coming. And Dennis said, okay, well, now what am I going to do? So he called my dad in a panic and he said, I have this, my banker won't wire money. My dad said, it's fine, let's just partner on them. Will that make your banker happy? And he said, yeah, we'll take them then. Okay, but also, it's the same situation. We don't expect our feeders to back out. One time in 25 years, he still took the cattle. But we also don't expect you guys to back out. Now, last year, this happened a lot. When the price just kept going like this, if we don't expect the feeders to back out when the price is going like this, we can't expect you guys to back out when the price is going like this. You agreed upon a price on a day you were happy with. Take your cattle to the scale, because if you don't, then we're asking the feeders to do something that you guys wouldn't do. And we actually had a rancher this year threaten to not bring his cattle to the scale. And my dad, just nicely, if any of you know my dad, he's kind of scary looking, but he's super nice. He just said, well, I'll just go pick him up then. Which he didn't, he brought him to the scale. But the ironic part was, I'd sold his heifer calves for almost $1,600 a head. And we had put in 7 bids on his steer calves and he wouldn't sell them. And so when he finally decided to sell them, then the next few days it rallied up just a little bit. It was this fall, we didn't see a huge rally. And then it went back down. And so when he came to load his heifers, it was 5 cents higher. And he was mad about it. My dad said, well, your daughter just got away with murder selling your heifer calves, so you should bring your steers as well. But if we expect you guys to fulfill the contract just like we hold our feeders to fulfill the contract. On here, keep a copy of the contract for your records. Whenever I come to ship, I will have a copy of the contract that I have between you and I and me and the feeder. But not saying if I forget that or something, make sure you bring a copy to the shipyard. I've never had someone bring a copy of their contract to the shipyard. I've never even had someone ask, can I watch you do the numbers? You have to remember, we're talking big money here. If I make one rounding error, I did it this year, it was $32. I felt really bad. It was my neighbor, so I got home and our secretary runs the calculations and she said, well, you didn't pay him enough. And I was thinking, thousands of dollars. And I said, well, how come they didn't know? She said, no, $32. So I just called him and said, I'll put a check in your mailbox for $32. I'm sorry, but it's big money. It's your guys' single paycheck a year. Don't be afraid to come over my shoulder and say, hey, can I watch you run those numbers? Because that makes me feel better, that you guys actually care about it. And so, don't come in the scale house and just sit down the whole time and, cause me to worry, but check my numbers. Come in when I'm weighing them. I weigh thousands of cattle a year, but everyone makes mistakes, but it's your guys' paycheck. And I would expect that if I underpay you guys, that I would pay you, but also if we make a mistake and overpay you guys, we expect our producers to send that check back, because the only way is to be honest. We're trying to be your advocates. And when you ship 20,000 calves and you've been doing this for 45 days, and you remember yesterday's and you remember the day before and you remember all that stuff, I mean, check our numbers, make sure we're right, and make sure that you're getting the most money and that we don't overpay money. And then deliver the exact cattle that were agreed upon on the contract. That's also really important. You know, it's funny, when the market is like at a decline like this, and you forward contract, everyone brings everything. They bring every heifer that's a little bit lame. They bring every steer with a short tail, everything. They bring it all, and they say, oh, will they take them for this price? Well, no, that's not agreed upon on the contract. And the nice part about our feeders is if there's room on the truck, I'll just sell them. I'll call the feeder. I did it this year. I called the feeder and I said, I have a few extra steers. Will you take them? And he said, well, of course, but I'm not going to pay $2.50 for them. And he said, but I'll pay $2, which was in October. At a 700-pound steer, that's really fair. And I said, okay. I said, you know, I went to the rancher. I said, do you want to sell them for $2? He said, yep. And so we can do that. But make sure that you bring the cattle that are exactly on the contract, because as we get more nitpicky and the volatility goes up and calves are more expensive, all of that, feeders might turn cattle down because they don't fit the contract. And so just bring what's on the contract. And expect to have some sorted off. And that's another thing. A lot of times the contract will read 70 steers and you only own 70 steers. I am not going to take all 70 steers because there is a quality count unless you made one at home. There's 1 or 2 steers that do not fit what my feeder is looking for. Just expect that. Expect a little bit of a quality count. Now, what's really nice is if you sorted them off at home and you just bring the best ones because it makes everything faster and we can get the cattle on the truck better. But expect to have some cut off. Now, I do have a few producers who will leave the ones that are smaller and stuff at home, and so I don't do any cuts. That's fine. But it's my job, once I write you the check for those cattle, I own them. And so I need to be proud of what I'm sending to the feeder because the repercussions come back to me and not to you guys. And so, but in return, the answer is just I'm not going to buy them again. And so there's not a lot of gray area when they look like that. Okay, so another thing I have in this booklet is slide calculations, which is really tough. I think a lot of people, that is an area that, and I have a whole, I wrote in here and I wrote some descriptions, but make sure that your cattle have a proper slide and shrink on them. And the reason is because it makes them more marketable. Now we're going to a 2-way slide a lot of times. The feeders don't, I've talked to tons of feeders, they think a 2-way slide is fine, but the slide still has to be proportionate with the cattle. Now a lot of times we get producers who want to do a 6-cent slide. That's not going to cut it. We have to, you know, we do a lot of 8s, we do a lot of 10s, and on really uneven cattle we do a lot of 12s. Now we understand, we buy a lot of calves in eastern Montana, and I'm not sure how many, and it might be similar up here, but in eastern Montana your calves can range about 200 pounds depending on the moisture. Okay? We know that, and we work with our feeders and we let them know these calves are coming from Ekalaka. We call them in about July. Hey, it looks like they're going to be heavier or lighter than they were last year. We give the feeder some heads up so he can rearrange his pens and decide when they get there in October. That's understandable. I get that. That's out of your control. That's act of God. But try to get as close as you possibly can to that weight and make sure you have a good shrink and a good slide. And so kind of a rule of thumb that we use is if you have to trail the cattle more than 10 miles in and sort from the mothers, we're going to put a 0% shrink on it. If you have to trail under 5 miles and sort, it's 1%. If you just have to gather and sort, it's 2%. And if the cattle are standing in the bunk and we just load them on the truck, it's a 3% shrink. That's pretty common. We don't want you guys, to have repercussions. A lot of people don't understand shrink. But when we send calves to the Midwest, say we give you a 0% shrink and you actually didn't trail them as far, and they shrink 12% on the way to Iowa, guess who gets the phone call? Me. Says, well, the cattle shrank 12%, the average is 8. Where's that extra percentage? And so then what do? Next time, I won't buy your calves at 0%, even if you do actually have to trail them. And so it's a middleman game, but if we're honest and we do things right on both ends, then we have people that are happy. And I understand, I had a set of calves, they blew a fan on the truck in a 14-hour drive, took 28-hour drive. and they shrunk a lot. And the feeder called and said that, they're here, they're fine, they're drinking, they're eating, we're good to go. Okay, there's special circumstances. These guys aren't out to get you. I'm not out to get you, but if you put a good shrink and slide on it, it makes it much easier for me to market them. And I have kind of that in there too. Now, another thing I'm going to talk about is the break even. With the volatility of the market, I don't have feeders that are comfortable hearing a dial tone anymore. And I heard that kind of starting in the end of November and all through December, and they're kind of keeping up with it. I don't know if it's going to be a new trend or not, but how many of you in here are multi-generational? Okay, that's where we see the biggest issues. Or how many of you are married and ask your spouse about your selling your calves? So, and those are two issues that we see right there. The multi-generational and when you have to ask your spouse. And I'm I'm third generation, but my brother just had a baby, so now there's 4 generations. But I understand, you have to ask your parents. So we are strongly encouraging all of our producers during calving, which some of you might have already started, to figure out the price that you'd be happy to sell your calves for. And be realistic. Figure out your break even. Figure out how much money you need to make per calf. I don't care if that's 500 or 50. It doesn't matter to me. But get that number on a sticky note. If you raise 700-pound calves and you know you have to have $1.80 to be happy, make sure every single person who's a decision maker agrees on that price and puts it on the calendar. Because I'll tell you what happened this year. I have 5 loads of steers that I buy from the same rancher going on 25 years. I bid him in July at $272. He said, no, I'd like $275. I said, okay. Then I bid him in August at $240, and he said, no, I gotta have a little bit more. Then I bid him again and again and again and again and again. He never sold his calves. We partnered with him on the feed yard. We locked him in on the board at $154. That's $1.20 if he would have just made a decision. And he's a great producer. He knows his break even, but he was chasing just a little bit more. He was worried what his neighbor got. Look how much money that cost him. And our feeders are not comfortable with hearing a dial tone. And so we need to know when we call to bid your calves, we need to know who we need to work with. And if your price says $180 and I call and bid you in June, $196, you sell your calves. You don't need to tell me what that sticky note says. I don't care. I mean, everyone's going to have a different sticky note. But if I call and bid you that price or above, you sell your calves and you be happy with it. Because the feeders, there's so much volatility in a day. I don't know how many of you watch that board over the day, but I mean, extreme volatility. A lot of times, by the time you hang up the phone, call your dad, call your wife, call your children, the board could have dropped, and the price is no longer good. And they're not doing that to harm you guys. They have to lock them in for risk protection. And they can't get that done when there's a lapse in time. And so, my dad was kidding when he used to buy calves in the early 90s. He said, well, I would leave the bid there for about 30 days. Then I'd call and be like, did you decide yet? Is that still good? And now we can't do that. And so our feeders, I have feeders say, if I hear dial tone, the offer's done. And so really, and we'll sit down and work. If you guys don't know how to figure out your break even, if you want help figuring out your break even, we are more than happy to sit down with you guys and help you do that, because it will make your life 100 times easier, it makes our life easier, and it makes the feeder's life easier. And we see a lot of people leave money on the table because they didn't take that step. And now we're always going to try to get you guys the best money that we possibly can from the feeders for your calves. Now, we do not do any, we do it in the sale barn, but we do not buy any country cattle without having them already sold. Not one set. And so we're not determining the price. The futures are determining the price and the feeders. And we call several feeders. A lot of times it gets into a little bit of a bidding war, and then whoever has the highest price will call back and say, this is what we can get for them. But make sure you know what price you're happy with. Also, a feeder is no longer going to just put a bid out there. I'm sure some of you remember when they'd call and say, well, what do you want for your calves? And you'd say, well, what can you get me? That's not going to be the case anymore. There's enough cattle out there that they need to know a range. And if I think it's too low, Like I just did this the other day. A guy had 800-pound steers. Was in September, I guess, not really the other day. And he told me he wanted $1.70, and I said, well, they're worth $2, so that's what I'm going to try to get for them. But if I get a lower bid, I'll call you. So we're not going to, if you say $1.70, they're really worth $2. I'm going to be your best advocate. I don't want anyone to steal your calves. But you can't just say, well, I don't know, what can you get for me? Because they won't put a bid in. They need to know some sort of range where you're happy. And a lot of people want to do a 20-cent range. And if you guys figure out if you have multiple loads, a 20-cent range is a lot of money. I mean, it's a little hard for the feeders to kind of pick and choose. They don't really want to offend you, but you know, they really like your calves, but they definitely can't pay the top end. So try to narrow it down to 5 or 6 cents. And if you tell me that and I think you're out of line, I'm going to bump your price up. I mean, we do that because we want you guys to come back to us year after year and say, okay, you know what? This is what I have for my calves. This is what I think they're worth. Do you agree? And so don't be afraid to tell us that because I'm going to bump your price up. I don't know how many of you know Dave Ashcraft from Twin Bridges, but he said one year he called my dad and he was teaching me how to be a cattle buyer, he said, at his dining room table. But he said that he called my dad and he said, I want $160 for my steers. And my dad said, okay. And he has pretty nice steers. And my dad called back, well, I sold them for $178. He said, you're the only order buyer in the world who would do that. And that's what we strive to do is if we think you guys are lower than the market, we're going to tell you. Now also, but the other hand is if we think you're way too high, we probably won't tell you, but you're not going to get a bid on your calves. And so make sure it's reasonable. Make sure you watch some of those. Another thing that's, a lot of people watch the video sales to kind of figure out how to price their calves. I would discourage that. Because if you watch the video sales compared to the video sale report, whole different story. I mean like black and white. So if you see a set of calves sell from your area, on Superior, on Northern, on Western, wait till the next day, go look in the market report, see if those calves actually sold before you pick that price up to carry over to me. Because a lot of times we see guys running calves up and then no selling them, and then everyone's calling saying, well, I saw these calves sell on Superior for $225. I'm like, well, they didn't really sell. Did you check the market report? Nope. I'm like, okay, check the market report to make sure that you're realistic with the price. So that's another thing that's really important. I think the videos provide a great opportunity for you to look at the prices and for you to get a ballpark, but don't just watch the video. Make sure that you go the next day, or sometimes Superior always puts it up during the sale. Northern, sometimes you have to wait a few days or a week or something, but make sure you go find that market report, make sure it's still valuable. Now remember, the way that the market was dropping this year, that price is only going to be semi-close for a few days potentially. And so, I mean, I hope next fall that we see like this the whole fall, not one movement up and down, but we all know that's unrealistic. And so remember to watch the board and kind of see what the board's been doing as well as that price. And so we will definitely, if you guys need help figuring out your break-evens, we have pages that will help you with calculators. If you want to know more about the futures, we have consultants that we work with to hedge calves. A lot of people hedge their own calves and then wean them and sell them in the spring. We're happy to help you guys with that. Also, another thing is, this is like an order buyer's worst thing is, well, my neighbor got more than that. That does not mean anything to me. I don't know if your neighbor sold one load, if they sold steers, if they're black, if they're white, if they have implants, if they have no shots, if they have 2 rounds of shots, if they wean them. I have no idea. Your neighbor's price is not indicative to the price you guys get. Just like you don't compare your financial statements to your neighbor's. You all have a different game. You're all, paying different operating loans. You all need to buy different tractors, or you might need to buy a pickup, or you might be good this year. Figure out what works for you and your family, because that's the only person that I can put a bid in on. I can't control who bid on your neighbor's calves. If you want to ask them and get them to bid on your calves, that's great. But that does not help me when I'm determining the price I can offer you for your calves. Another thing that I talk about in here, which is kind of a little minute, but is banding versus cutting. My feeders ask me that every time. Well, were the steers banded or were they cut? And so make sure that if you're going to pick a method, just pick it and do it. And it doesn't really matter price-wise. They definitely prefer them to be cut versus banded, but they might not pay any more for them. They just might not bid on them the other way. But just, what?
Why isn't
Because on banding, a lot of people miss one. And so then in the feed yard, they're causing ruckus and all that. So, and also remember to tag your heifers in the left ear. The reason is because we get so many calls for replacement heifer calves that if I come look at your calves and I think there's some that might fit our customers' needs for replacement heifer calves, I'm going to try to get you a premium. Like I have a set of heifer calves right now, they weigh $6.75, and a girl just put a bid in this morning at $13.25 a head. And that's way out of the market. I mean, completely out of the market. But everything was done right in preparation. Those calves could either go to the sale barn or the feed yard, or they could be sold as replacement heifer calves. And they're nice enough, so I'm going to sell them as replacement heifer calves. But a lot of guys will not buy them if they're not tagged in the right ear. So when you're tagging your calves, if you think that you might not keep all the replacement quality ones, I mean, I had a guy who had 10 of them. I bought them and threw them on another load. I mean, you don't have to have a load full. We can work with you. But just make sure that you tag them in the right ear and do things correctly if you have a potential discount for replacement heifer calves, because there's a big premium on that.
We should take them in the left ear.
Yes, tag them in the left ear.
Take
Yeah,
the
correct ear.
yeah, the correct ear. Tag them in the correct ear. We tag them in the left ear. Yes, because the bangs vaccination will go on the right ear.
Gotcha.
Oh, and another thing with that is, I had a customer this year, and I sold his heifer calves for close to $1,600, and he put a free martin in there. Don't do that. Because the guy bought them, and he said, well, when my vet palpated them, there's a free martin. I can tell you, he'll never bid on that set of calves again. Never. Was it really worth that $1,600 when the guy had a whole truckload of them? No. I mean, it's not worth it, because he'll never buy those calves again. It doesn't matter how well they fit the program, how nice they are, how easy they are to sell as bred heifers. He's not going to bid on them again. And the guy knew it was a free martin. It wasn't an accidental. I mean, he knew, because when they were on the road leaving, he looked at me and said, I think I might have put a free martin on there. That stuff's not okay. Yes?
Okay, I'm trying to be difficult with this, but
You're fine.
for identification purposes, we'll tag in the left ear side of the brain, but then we'll put in a flag tag in the right ear. So you suggest not to do that?
Nope, that's fine, because the flag tag can be cut out.
Okay.
And then they can put the bangs vaccination. The thing is, a lot of times when you tag calves, the tag hole will be so big that when they go to tattoo, there's not enough room. But on a fly tag, you're not going to put those in as baby calves.
Right.
And so the ear will have grown, the hole will be small enough that they can still tattoo. So that is kind of everything I have. We have a few minutes. I'm sure there's some questions. Yes.
So on our family ranch, we had a longhorn bull we used for our first calf heifers, and he was solid, but he threw some colorful calves, and we just got beat up
At the sale barn.
So
We probably bought them,
like,
sorry.
We only had like 8 of them,
Yes.
but they just took a beat, and it was
Yes.
horrible. So could we market those calves with you if we only had like 8 calves?
If you can find someone else, or another thing is, and I should probably include this, we buy in 7 sale barns a week. We're in Great Falls, Butte, Missoula, Lewistown, Blackfoot, Idaho, Three Forks, sometimes Billings, Dillon. Yeah, we buy, and then we have guys who buy all along the High Line. And so I can't tell you how many weeks we come home with a load and a half, or a load and 3/4, or 2.5 loads. Great Falls the other day, we bought 1,000 head. We buy a lot in the sale barn. If you have some calves like that, just call and say, hey, can I run and meet you? Do you have a truck coming this way? Because we will probably be able to find a home for them, but you're right, you will get robbed in the sale barn, and that's why we buy a lot of calves there, sorry. It's because it's the nature of the sale barn. It's who's there, who's bidding that day. Yes?
You guys weigh in the field much?
On, like your calves? Yes. We do prefer that. We prefer to weigh on the ground as well. We don't like to hire people to bring a portable scale. We'd rather have you haul them somewhere to a stationary scale. The reason is because a portable scale is so expensive. And people just charge, and I don't feel the cost, you feel the cost. But-
I prefer it and I pay it.
Oh, you do? Okay, that's fine. But if guys ask us and there's a scale close, we just have them run down to the scale. And it's usually another customer of ours, especially like in the Dillon Twin Bridges area. And so we just have a mutual agreement that we can use their scale. Yes?
So you see all these all-natural programs verified, is that really benefiting producers? I mean, what are you seeing on here, and are we getting any extra money or?
None.
Okay.
You want on calves. Well, take that back. You might get $1 or $2, but is it really worth the hassle? That's what's tough for us. I don't have any customers who will pay more for all natural calves. They'll certainly buy them, but they're not going to give you any more money. Now the thing is, if you have all natural yearlings, those have a big premium. But all natural calves is kind of like an easy playing field. And the reason is because there's so few feeders who actually buy all natural calves that we have to market to all of our feeders. And all natural kind of fits into every program, so they're just going to pay what they normally pay. Now I handed around, I'm not sure if you guys all got it, but the superior premiums. You'll see on there that, vaccinations do pay, but all natural is not on that list. And so we're seeing it going farther and farther and farther away from, and the reason is it's a little bit of dishonesty. How many times have you sat in the sale barn and they're like, oh, these calves are all natural? And the thing about it is when you buy 20,000 calves a year, you might have a load of all natural, but if you've done it right, you have 10 head at home that have had shots. Well, I can use those 10 head. I mean, I have trucks going to Midwest, multiple times a week. And so a good producer will say, well, here are my natural calves, but I also have 10 at home, same weight, who's had shots. Can we throw them on a load? But do you know how many producers say, well, I didn't vaccinate one. I'm like, you have 300 calves. I mean, I'm not an idiot. You had to have vaccinated at least one. And so where is that one? Oh, none. And so that's why the premium's kind of gone out of it. It's the same thing in the sale barn when they say they've had all the shots. Zero. No extra money for all the shots. That's, if you've had all the shots and you're selling in the sale barn, sit in there, make sure that auctioneer reads, had Bovashield Gold 5, they've been poured with Dectomax. Make sure he actually reads, because to me, all the shots mean that's my buddy's calves and they really haven't had any shots, but I think they'll bring a little bit more. And so, but I'm sure if any of you sit in the sale barn, you hear them say that all the time. They're on the full program. I'm like, well, what does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything.
So now you're hearing more that you're supposed to get more money for the calves that have the tag of, ownership or country
Yes.
or whatever. You know what I'm talking
Yes.
about? And?
We don't pay any extra for it. The only thing that we're seeing is more relationship with Canada. I actually have a lot of producers in Canada.
They have to do up there, don't they?
Correct, but in order for your calves to go up there, it's really highly recommended as well. It might be required too. Correct, and especially here, it's much easier for me to sell to my Canada feeder than it is for me to sell them all the way to Kansas. And so if you think that's a market, it might not hurt, but also it's kind of a give and take thing. I will not pay any more for cattle going to the Midwest with that tag. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But we are definitely getting more and more.
It just costs more money to do that.
Correct. More and more producers from Canada who are communicating in feeders, and I'm speaking at a few conferences up there. And so I think that relationship doors are going to be, and especially like in this location, you guys are prime to head right up there. But it takes a little bit of an extra step.
You gotta be ready to actually move them now up there if you're gonna. take
Well,
that extra
and
step.
with the dollar like this,
I don't think you're gonna go up
we'll
there.
wait a few more years. Yes?
You said trailing, you get your shrink, it depends on how far you trail it.
Yes.
What if you're going from your trail to scale, and you're gonna handle?
Like haul them? Or are
Yeah.
you trailing to the scale?
No, if you're gonna put them on a truck and take them to the scale.
We still technically, it depends on how far the scale is, but it's going to be between a 1 or 2% shrink. The reason is cattle shrink, don't quote me, but I think it's 5% an hour. So we're trying to calculate how much time you're going to be gathering and trailing, and that we're trying to do that mental calculation in our head so that we don't get the call that says, well, they shrank 12%, because that's not fair to the feeder. They expect about a 6 to 8% shrink depending on how far they're going. But if we don't do the right shrink at the scale and on your contract, then the feeder is who's losing. And I don't know if you all watch Cattle Facts. I'm a big Cattle Facts fan, but the feeders definitely did not make money in the last few years. That's not who's receiving the extra price for the calves. And so they're definitely not out to get you. I was just talking to one of my big big customers. He spent $125,000 in vet supplies and drugs last year alone. I mean, they're not making, they see every repercussion that you guys see, and it's not a high market or high margin industry right now. And so they're just trying to, I mean, they lost a lot of money the last few years, so they're trying to make it work for them too. Yes?
I read a good article about, we're gonna investigate this, price here, price there. Have you heard much about that?
Yes, and the reason is, we talk about that a lot, but if you look at all the factors with the drop in price, it makes 100% sense. We're down exports 1.5 billion in 2015. Right there alone is a ton. I mean, that is a big industry. So 1.5 billion pounds of protein was decreased in exports. Also, we had customers who would call us in June and July, and they still had calves that needed to go to the packing plant in April because the packer wouldn't put a bid in on them. And the reason that the packers wouldn't put a bid in on them is because we're getting carcasses that are too big anyways. Instead of selecting a lot of moderate framed replacement heifers, people seem to take their big end. Okay, these are the top 10 big ones. I'm going to take them home. And so what we've done is we've just gotten these calves that are getting too big for the packer, and so they're having to rechange their whole system. And so it's almost like a chain of effect. Everyone wants to put all the blame on the packer and be like, stupid packer. But they're just reacting to the calves that we're producing. And I was in Cargill's plant, and the calves were dragging on the floor because they were so big. And so when the packers are working with trying to adjust to that, obviously they should have put bids in. That's part of their job. We all know that. But, I mean, it's just like us. We weren't putting any bids in April, May, and June because we didn't know what the market was going to do. They're in the same boat. Now, obviously, if we look at their margins, we see the price of beef in the grocery store still be ridiculously high. But a lot of that has to do with the exports. And a lot of that comes down to policy. And so, but 1.5 billion is a lot. And I think, I don't think, well, the CME group came when I was at NCBA and was talking about what they're going to do. And there's a term for it, but I just was there. So what happens is guys will sell like 1,000 shares, let the market fall by 2,000 and watch it rise. That's illegal. But we saw more of that than ever before because we now have money guys in the cattle industry hedging side. They don't own any cattle. They're not protecting their risk. They're playing the game. It's technically illegal. But when you have a lot of guys doing that every day, what's the cattle market going to do? And so they're going to try to crack down and create a computer program that alerts them when guys are doing that because it's never something we've seen before because we've never seen the volatility. We've never seen that be able to happen. And so now we're seeing it more and more is, sell 1,000.
A little bit better so that they can make more bucks.
Right, and it's technically legal. So they're going to the CME group is really working on how to better monitor that and how to do a better job of finding those guys every time they do that. But, I mean, they've never seen it before because we've never seen this volatility, so it's a new problem. But they're definitely working on it, and that has to do with a lot of the volatility we've seen in the market. Any other questions?
What's the market gonna be next fall?
Don't hold me to it. I think 500-pound steers are gonna kind of average in that 185 to 195 range. I definitely think we're gonna sell some over $2, but I think that's gonna become a little bit rare. If you're interested in forward contracting, it's gonna be more and more important that you work with someone that you trust, just year after year, because the amount of loads that were backed out this year, and something that happens in the cattle industry, which is so dumb. A guy will buy it, sell it to an order buyer, who will sell it to another order buyer, who will sell it to the feeder. I don't know why we do that. I mean, that guy could just call a feeder, but we have guys buying calves. I mean, I had a kid down near Reed Point. He's my age, and he bought all these calves. I'm like, what are you going to do with them? He's like, well, I was hoping you would buy them. I'm like, no, they're above the market. I'm not, I'll buy them if they're at the market or they were heifers. And so I was like, I can pay a little bit of premium, but I can't pay that for them. And so that's what we're seeing more of, is people thinking they can make quick money. So let me buy some calves, watch the market rally, sell them to another order buyer. Make sure that they're not doing that. Now, I wouldn't say that we do it just a little bit, and the only reason that we do it with one guy, and he's actually my partner, Dennis Metzger, because he was the manager of Western Video. And so his clientele, especially for like natural calves and things like that, he has a much bigger clientele than I do. And so a lot of times I purchase them and sell them to him and he resells them, but we never go multiple hoops. And so there was actually a guy up here who he went through like 4 order buyers, and one of the order buyers died. I don't know if he died or went broke, but if someone goes broke, they always say they die. And so then he just had his calves, because the first order buyer who sold them to the second order buyer didn't have anyone to sell them to, so he backed out, and then the first order buyer backed out. So it's going to become more and more important that you work with someone that you trust, because, I mean, we're going to see more volatility, and we're going to see a harder, it's the demand for beef is up, supply is down. Theoretically, we're going to have good prices, but we just have to fit the product to exactly the contract and work with someone you trust. Yes?
So where do we find this definition of all natural cattle? I mean, I got guys calling, wanting to buy these all natural yearlings, and one guy says, well, as long as they haven't had any antibiotics, but I want them all vaccinated. The other guy says if they've seen a needle, they're not natural. I mean, is there any definition there written down?
Yes, all natural is technically supposed to be regulated by the USDA.
But where is that definition written?
On the USDA website, which is a little hard to go through, I know,
Yeah,
but
I haven't found it, because I wanted to know what an all-natural cow or yearling was supposed to look like.
you know, to us, it's all the shots but no antibiotics or implants. But a lot of times our feeders will request, they can't have any shots, they can't do this and this and this, but I would agree. That is a little confusing. So is organic beef. That's a little bit confusing too. We don't pay any extra money for that as well. But that's one really negative thing about the cattle industry is we've seemed to just get away with half the truth. And we've done it for so long that it now becomes, we see it the worst in the sale barn. I mean, a lot of times we buy a lot of calves in the sale barn, and we buy preg-checked open heifers, and I could make a living on calving out preg-checked open heifers. I really could. I mean, we calve a lot of preg-checked open heifers, but we've just created an industry where that's acceptable. And I don't know why that is, but it drives me crazy because we have people who are dishonest or tell half the truth, and then it affects the whole industry. You should receive a premium for natural. I'm not saying you shouldn't, just like preconditioning shots. But we've created an industry that it's super easy to say they've had all the shots, or they're all natural. And we, instead of telling the whole truth and getting a little bit of extra money for it, we tell, as an industry, not any of you guys, but as an industry, we tell part of the truth, and then we've decreased the value on those things because the feeders don't know. If someone says they've had all the shots, technically that should save a step for the feeder, so they should be able to pay more, right? But they find that those cattle really haven't had all the shots. So they're not going to pay any more when they have to run them through the chute anyways. And so things like that, the definition of all natural is tough. And that's, I think, why there's no premium for it. Well, a minuscule.
Back when age and source was the big thing, this is gonna make you all kinds of money. So we did age and source and sold them through Superior, and if they didn't have the tags in them, they couldn't go. And 2 months later, I'm watching the auction, and the guy says the tags will be in the trucks with the calves. And they sold right on Superior and went right on, and I said, that's the end age source right there.
That's annoying. I would agree. That stuff drives me crazy because it's
Yeah.
hard to market. I mean, we try to tell 100% the truth every single time. And just like that $32, it probably wasn't even worth my gas to drive over there. But we want to do everything right. And so if they're all natural and you have some, and you can show me proof. I ask for proof, which a lot of people get offended by. But I have feeders who might pay a premium if we can send some proof with the truck. Just like all the preconditioning shots. My feeders will call me year after year and say, I want to buy his calves because I write a little envelope for the feeders. In there he put exactly the dates that they had these shots. If there was any that he doctored, he wrote them down, and he sends it with the truck. And it just adds a sense of credibility. And I have a feeder in Sheridan, Montana, who does that on every single set. And I always laugh because a lot of times ranchers are trying to cut out the middle guy. They're like, well, I'll just sell to the feeder. And I'm like, okay, go ahead, start calling them. Because you have to create a relationship with them. I mean, just like a car salesman, you call and say, I have cattle for sale, they get hundreds of those calls a day. And so, but I have a guy who will buy those calves. He paid way over the market this year because he knows that they're going to send a list the exact day that they were vaccinated, what calves have been doctored, you know, all of this stuff. He weans them, and so exactly what they've been eating, and then he writes his name and phone number at the bottom and says, please call with any questions. And so that sort of stuff takes a little bit of extra work on you, but it makes the feeder say, I want to work with that guy every year. I want to buy his calves because I know he's honest, he sends good calves, and he gives me all the details. He's not hiding anything. And so we encourage our guys to do that as well, is, you know, just write them down every time you doctor one or things like that, because it helps the feeder out. I mean, then they know, and they can give you a little bit of extra money for your calves because they create a relationship with your calves and know. And also something we're doing that's a little bit different this year is I'm going to the Midwest for a month, and I'm meeting with every single feeder who bought calves from us. And I'm going to take pictures of those calves. And because a lot of people, we hear this all the time, well, Montana calves should get a premium because they're better than everyone else's. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, but how are we going to create an industry that accepts that and realizes that? And so I'm going to the Midwest for about a month in March, and I'm going to take pictures of everyone's calves compared to other calves from other places. Then we're going to hopefully put on presentations around Montana with those pictures and slideshows and feedback from the feeders and exactly what we see, because we think that Montana calves are the best. I definitely buy some calves that are not in Montana. We think the Montana producer as a whole is exceptional. But we have to create a standard of excellence in order for our calves to bring a premium. And those things like that, writing down all your shots, writing down all the ones that you doctor, writing down what they've been fed, that will raise you above that standard of excellence line. And they'll know that they want your calves every year. Yes?
Basically a portfolio on your operation for your
Yes. Yep, and this guy, it's just a sheet of paper. He folds it up, he puts it in with the brand inspection, but it just has the dates, the shots, and you know which ones he doctored, and he pulls the majority that he doctors off, so it's pretty easy. And then exactly the pounds that they've been, and it's easy for the feeder. He knows how much mineral they've been having, he knows how to start them on a ration, all of that. Yes?
You know, wires and line like crossbred cows, Angus,
Like calves or cows?
cows, are they looking, any of your buyers are looking especially for them or
Yes.
would buy them?
Yes. A lot. We also, you know, something we use, and if you guys have Facebook, I encourage you to go to my Facebook page, but I sell a lot of females off of my Facebook page, and it's kind of outstanding. I actually have 3 girls that work for me, but I posted a set of 49 bred cows from Montana, 1 iron. They were moving generations, so part of the grandpa's retirement was you sell 50 cows and give me the money. And so this kid was really bummed that he had to sell them, but they were nice. And I put them on Facebook on the 18th, they're sold, on the 18th of January. And they were seen by 51,000 people, and the video was watched 21,000 times. And we do that. We also encourage, if you want to sell your calves with us you've never sold, we encourage that we come up and video the calves. There's 2 reasons. I can reach a bigger audience on Facebook. I put all our calves on the website, but all of our females on Facebook. Also, if I've never bought calves from you before, I'm 23 years old, that check could be worth $250,000. Why should the feeder trust me when I say, well, they're fancy, right? Because that's a pretty blank term. If I can send them a video and say, this is what his calves look like right now, 10 times more likely to buy them. And it doesn't mean that we have to sell them on the video, but it just gives them some insurance that he can see your cows, he can see the country you run on, he kind of knows what they're going to look like when he gets them. And so we really encourage that. I think I filmed about 15,000 calves last summer. That's all I really do is just drive around, film calves. Sometimes we sell them, sometimes we don't, but at least my customers know what to expect.
Do you have a predominant, what state that your cows go to, like Nebraska?
Well, 3, Kansas, Nebraska, and Iowa. Majority. We sell a decent amount to Texas,